The broadcast is now starting.
Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Hope you're having a great week. And welcome to another amazing episode of the Pixelmail webinar series and today's offering of how to kick fear and toxicity out of the workplace, a practical guide. As always, I am your host, Michael Wells. I am the Partnerships and Community Manager here at Pixelmail. If you've never joined us before for one of these webinars, welcome. We are happy to have you. If this is your second, third, 20th time back, we're happy to have you back. Thank you so much for always joining us. We've got a really great topic and a really amazing speaker. I'm really excited to share this stuff with you guys. Just a couple quick things, the usual stuff for a webinar. If you guys have questions or comments, there is a questions and chat tab attached to this, so if you have those, shoot those out there. I'll be keeping track of those, and I will try to interject as best as possible throughout the session without interrupting too much to make sure we get to those questions. If we don't get to them in the moment, we do leave a little time for Q&A at the end, so we will get to your questions as best we can. If you're more socially minded and you like to do stuff on Twitter and all that stuff, you can use the hashtag PixelMailWebinars to ask your questions. You can also reach out to me directly at PixelMailTeam or Heather directly at Hedda Newman, Hedda Newman. For those of you who are more socially minded. With that, I'll stop blathering on. We have an amazing speaker today. She's back, and I'm so happy to have her here. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Heather Newman, take it away.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and all of that. So yeah, today we're going to go through a presentation that I've added to now since Ignite, that I did give it at Ignite, but I feel very strongly about it. So we decided to do it again, and I added to it too as well. So yeah, the topic is how to kick fear and toxicity out of the workplace, and something that I definitely keep an eyeball on, being someone who runs 2 businesses and a community member in the space and an MVP, and I love having a conversation. I don't love having conversations about this, to be honest, but I think they're necessary conversations and ones that we should be having. So a little bit about me. Ta-da! I am the co-founder and CMO of Content Panda, and we have a in-context, on-demand application for help, training, and support for Office 365 and SharePoint that I love demoing. So if you're interested, let me know. Little plug. I am a Microsoft MVP in Office apps and servers. I've been working on SharePoint since it was called Tahoe in 2001. So I've had a myriad of jobs in the Microsoft space. I was on the original SharePoint marketing team when there was just 8 of us, and SharePoint was a startup. And I got to do many things that were firsts there, which was really exciting. So I got to start the SharePoint ecosystem as far as partners. I was given a list of partners to call and ask them if they wanted to be partners. And then I got to help write the first 125 case studies on SharePoint, which I then accidentally deleted. And at the time, there was no recycle button or undo, so I had to go to the guys in the lab and ask them to restore them from the server. So we all were reminded that people sometimes do those things, and so I think, and then AvePoint created its solution, and so I think I helped out with a feature there for all of us back in the day. And then we also started the SharePoint conference and thought that it would be a good idea to get everybody together. So the SharePoint conference was the first one. The first 3 was part of what I did for logistics for the team. So I've been in the SharePoint world a really long time. I've worn every hat. As I said, AvePoint, I worked for them as their senior vice president of global marketing. So I ran around the world with them and helped them change their brand. And that was really fun. I've been what they call a V-Dash, and so I've worked inside of Microsoft. I've been an FTE, and now I run Content Panda. And then Creative Maven is my marketing consulting business, where I work with businesses to work on their messaging and their brand and their strategic plans. I do a lot of things in technology, but I also am very passionate about social justice and women's issues and diversity, which is part of our topic today. And so I have a lot of clients in many realms there, and I do a lot of personal brand work with people to really get their message out for themselves. So I've got my hands on a lot of things. I love street art. That's something that's here in Los Angeles. I live in Marina del Rey, California. I am staring at the marina right now. It's lovely here. And so I go hunting for those sorts of things. I was a theater major back in the day. And so I am a theater person / technologist. And so I have my hands in the arts quite a bit too. I write songs, I write on medium.com a lot about inspiration and motivation and things that move me. I was just in New Orleans and Puerto Rico, and I wrote a bunch about New Orleans, and Puerto Rico's coming soon. So, and a beautiful place. We had a SharePoint Saturday there. I do a lot of speaking on the SharePoint Saturday circuit and a lot of the big conference circuits, talking about Microsoft Teams and Planner. I'm very passionate about both of those and SharePoint, as well as diversity. So I think that covers me a little bit. Oh, and I'm also involved with Women in SharePoint. Kathy Dew and Liz Sundet and some of those other ladies. I work a lot with them on what we do in our third-party events to make sure that we're covering diversity there and working with those teams. And then I'm also part of the CMO club because I'm a chief marketing officer. So that's me. Let's see. So, diversity and inclusion, these things have been around a really long time. And I also think that in the current climate that we're in, and with a lot of the movements and a lot of memos that have come out, diversity and inclusion is now being looked at in a different way. And a lot of people are changing like from women in X to diversity in X to be more inclusive. I think there was a time and space for a lot of the women's movements to be pushed forward, and then, but that it didn't always include everybody. And so I feel like the move, especially in our technology industry, from those kinds of things to be more inclusive and to also include men, to include white men, and build allies and have conversations, and all of those sorts of things are super important, because we can't make change unless we all do it together. And so diversity and looking at how people, all the different wonderful things about all of us, but then also being inclusive so that we include everybody in the conversation is really important. And just like the slide says, it's the right thing to do for our businesses globally. Top 4 things in looking at enabling diversity and inclusion, it's looking at transforming your culture. Is your culture inclusive? Are you looking at those things, and are there ways to bring people to the table that maybe haven't been at the table? We're all different. Some people are extroverts like myself. Some people are introverts, and we come at things in different ways. And studies out right now, and most of the time people are like, well, why should I do this? And it's great, but I'm like, well, there's facts. There are facts and numbers and percentages about that. The bottom line, if you're looking at numbers and you're talking to a C-level, that the more inclusive and diverse your business is, there is more productivity, more happiness, and also it breeds more revenue because of that. So those things are all connected. I think empowering people by making sure that you're recruiting and retaining, and then also looking for diverse talent out there in the world. It also then expands your pipeline, right? So I think that's, it's like these things are all connected. And then customers, and I know as a person in the world that buys stuff, you're actually looking at my house right now, and I pay attention to what businesses and companies are doing in the world and who they are and what they stand for. And I think it's important. And so when you can, and it's not a bolt-on, it's not, we're doing this because we just got to bolt it on and we want to be part of the bandwagon. But one of the things I really appreciate about Microsoft and about IBM, for example, is that they've had diversity programs since they've existed, and they've been leading the charge in that way. Have they always gotten it right? Have they always, been at the forefront? Yes and no, but the fact that they've had those programs and that they keep evolving them, it's always, to me, our evolution is what makes us strong. Sometimes things get backdated, and maybe a word shouldn't be used anymore, or the way we sort of look at something is an old, outdated way. And I think that Microsoft and IBM, having just worked on the diversity and tech program at Ignite, with IBM being the champion sponsor there, that relationship was so exciting to see. And also, like, 100 for IBM, it was like 100 years of diversity, which is unbelievable. So I think that all of these four things of transforming your culture, empowering people, which then expands your pipeline, and then delighting your customers. These are things that I think are super important and also connected to kicking fear and toxicity out of your workplace. If we look at these four things as the way to sort of frame diversity and inclusion, then we start chipping away at some of the fear and toxicity that people have. So start with why. This is a really great book by Simon Sinek that a bunch of friends of mine and I sort of go back to all the time, and I put it in every presentation that I've ever given, and it's Start with Why. And there, you can read the book, but you can also go watch his 15-minute TED Talk, which is excellent. And it's really focusing on the why and not the what, or sometimes even the how. And so I feel like as companies and individuals, if we know what our why is, why we get up out of bed every morning, why we create the software we create, why we work in the job that we work in, then we're constantly checking in with ourselves to make sure that we're happy and that we're not full of fear or upset all the time. You know, work-life balance is so very important. And I think that one of the top sessions at Ignite was dealing with burnout by Sonia Cuff, who is fantastic. And that session, I think, was one of the highest attended sessions, and also is the one that's getting a lot of play on demand. So if you have a chance to check that out, it's a really good one. Mental health and wellness is a part of the conversation, and it too has been, I think, leveled up, if you want to talk in gaming terms, in our world of that. That's also a part of diversity, inclusion, and intersectionality and belonging, which I'll get to in a second. So I think when we understand who we are and why we do things, and why, if we can see why a company is doing what they do as well, we can go back to those four transformational efforts around diversity and really make a difference. So understanding these things. So I put 4 words up here, and like I said, we started sort of with women, or as a people or persons of color, or a certain religion, or a certain sexual orientation. And I think that we should still have conversations and maybe safe spaces for groups to have those conversations, for sure. That I don't think that anyone in the world is saying, oh, we shouldn't do that anymore. But I think also it's, again, leveling up the conversation to be a little bit broader. And as we look into sort of what's been happening over the last bit, I think there's been more, if you look at a movie like Hidden Figures, if you look at other ways that we're looking at our own history here in the United States, but also all over the world, of really looking at who we are and where we came from. And some of it's not so nice, but it's also the acknowledgement of that, and talking about it is what moves us forward. And no matter what those things color every conversation we have. So diversity, inclusion, intersectionality, and belonging. I had a colleague of mine, Caruana Gatimu, who is a principal program manager for Microsoft Teams, who's a dear friend, and we do a lot of diversity stuff together. And we were talking, and I said, I was like, oh, I'm talking about diversity and inclusion, and she was like, oh, have you checked out, belonging's in there too? And I was like, oh, talk to me about that. And belonging is pretty much, it's the word, it's feeling like you belong, and in our companies, when you don't feel like you belong, you tend to not want to be there. You tend to maybe show up late. You tend to, not give your best while you're doing something. You just kind of sit with the status quo. And so putting diversity, inclusion, intersectionality, and I'm going to explain all these a little bit further, and belonging together, that's what makes up sort of the whole of this conversation and this picture. So we shorten that to DIBS. I got dibs on making the world a better place. How about that? So what is diversity? Diversity is the range of human differences, and it looks at everything, all the different ways that we are different, and taking those into consideration when we're looking at each other. And it's sort of the global overarching word that is used in this area. Inclusion is, involvement and empowerment. And I think the words here that are most important are worth and dignity, making sure that people are recognized for who they are and what they bring to the table. And then that brings belonging, right? And so looking at our values and practicing respect for other people is really important with inclusion. Intersectionality was something I learned about not too long ago. I've heard the word before, but I didn't really kind of understand the concept. And it's a framework for conceptualizing people who are affected by different disadvantages. It came out, there was a bunch of studies that happened that looked at a certain segment of people, and I believe it was Black women, which include, African American women, African women, women of color, and looking at, okay, there's, obviously that's race, and then looking at, what else are you as a person? I come at you as I'm a white woman of Eastern European descent that grew up in Michigan, right? And there's all kinds of other things that you don't know about me, about who I am. And so things that we can see, we tend to make judgments on, and have predispositions and stereotypes, right? But there are so many things about people that we never see, like maybe somebody's deaf in one ear, or they have, their sexual orientation, and what kind of religious, how they practice, right? So intersectionality is really looking at that this is a complex, we are complex, right? We are layered. We're like, I like to say we're a layer cake, like your mom would make you back in the day, when you have a birthday, or maybe even now. But like my mom loved those like 15,000 layer cakes. So anyway, so intersectionality is really sort of looking at that and understanding these discriminations and disadvantages just because of who you are. And so I think it's an important piece of understanding that people are every color of the rainbow, and that they have all kinds of facets to everything that they do, and their personalities, where they grew up, their experiences, what happened to them. And then as different segments have different discriminations that have been against them, they bring that to the table, because that is part of their history. Who you are and where you came from is very much a part of the conversation. And so understanding that and bringing that into your view, I think, is really important. Belonging. Belonging is, I wrote a piece about this on Medium not too long ago, and lots of people kind of, some people giggled, and other people were like, wow, okay. So I'll give you an example of belonging. So I'm a burner, if you will. So, which means I go to Burning Man, which is a art festival out in the middle of the desert in Gerlach, Nevada, which happens around the Labor Day weekend. Now, people always hear about Burning Man and they're like, oh my gosh, that's where people run around naked and listen to music and all that stuff. And fair enough, there's a bit of that, but there's also the most beautiful art you'll ever see in the world, the most beautiful music, and a place where people really share and connect with each other. I haven't been in a while. It's been about 3 years for me since I've been out there, but it's I've been 8 or 9 times, and my favorite week of the year for sure. And when I go to events, a lot of times I've traveled alone a lot, and because I've I have probably been involved with, I would probably say I could probably put it into the tens of thousands, just because of the last, 20 years of my life, right? So, and I make it a point to be observant and talk to people and ask questions. My personal why is to spread joy and to connect as many people as humanly possible. I know that for a fact. That is why I get up out of bed in the morning. It doesn't have to do with money. It doesn't have to do with, necessarily what I'm doing with my businesses. It doesn't have to do with being famous or anything like that. That is why I do what I do. And when I go to events, a lot of the times, especially these work events, so we're sometimes, depending on how people see them, events are a bit of a boondoggle. Let's be real. And also a reward sometimes for doing well. Sometimes it's because somebody doesn't want to go, and you're the, the person who is, least senior of the group or of the business, and they're like, you have to deal with this event, right? So there's a myriad of reasons you'll go to an event. And I think there's sometimes, depending on if you're extroverted or introverted, there's sometimes fear that comes with, going to new places. And maybe if you're speaking for the first time, or, you're trying to make inroads and you don't know anybody. I'll tell you that the Microsoft community, and especially Office 365 and SharePoint, is a very welcoming one. I've been an MVP for the last year, since February, but I've been in and around this community for a really long time, and I've always found that people are welcoming. But the thing is that some of that fear comes in, where that maybe it's an introverted person, or I've talked to lots of speakers and MVPs, and I can talk to anybody. I get on stage, all that kind of stuff. I have no fear about that. I still get jitters and stage fright, because I think that's important and a good thing. But I think that, I've talked to other speakers, and they've said, they're so comfortable when they're speaking, but then, they're actually very shy in their real life. And so it's not that they're, being offish, but it's more that they're shy as people, and so when people have said, do you think I should go talk to so-and-so and such and such, and I was like, yes, go talk to them, go introduce yourself. We're all just people. We all, drink the same coffee, kind of thing. So, there's some of that anxiety, I think, that comes with sometimes, public speaking, and also going to events. With the belonging story in Burning Man, getting back. So I see people walking by themselves sometimes, and it can be at an event, or it could be, the new person at your business, or it could be any of these places, right? And I kind of watch out for that sort of thing. And if somebody's by themselves and walking around alone, a lot of the times I'll go introduce myself, because why not? That's what I should be doing, right? And I think that one of the things at Burning Man is that there's so much art, there's so much to see. You all bring your bicycles and all that kind of thing, and you kind of travel in packs, and you camp with your friends, and then you have sister and brother camps that you go check out and you go visit. I mean, if I go to Burning Man, I know that I can get pancakes and metal, Metallica, from that camp, and then I can go over to my sister camp, Liminal Lounge, and they make pork butt on Tuesday nights, and then I can go over. I mean, it sounds crazy, but you could pretty much find, if you want a massage, you want to do yoga or whatever, or you're like, I really want a smoothie, you can find these things out there. It's kind of the magic of the playa. Anyway, when you travel around together, there's 10 radical tenets of Burning Man, and you can go burningman.com and see the 10. But radical self-reliance is one, and radical inclusion is the other. And the other one that always sticks out to me is leave no trace. You always leave something better than when you found it, right? So anytime any people who are burners that come to my house and there's a party, and the place gets a little bit messed up, it is always picked up before they leave. It's part of the ritual of what we do with each other, right? So my point about belonging, and I know I'm sticking on this for a while, but I feel like it's super important, because when you feel like you don't belong, you just don't do your best work, And when we would travel around at night, whether we were walking or on bikes or on an art car, and you can go look that up, but people make art cars of all kinds of things, whether it's a rocket or an armadillo or a light bulb or whatever. And you travel in packs, and there's an unwritten rule of you never leave somebody, You never, even if somebody sort of wanders off or whatever, and usually everybody comes back eventually. We look at stuff and dance a little bit or whatever, and you come back to where you were. And there is something about that connectedness and that sort of that agreement that we have with each other of including people and never leaving somebody somewhere. And that to me is really important, especially at events and different things like that, because I traveled around with 8 women with Creative Maven, my mavens, and we did event logistics for forever. And one of the things that I always said to them, obviously be super professional, and we always talked about, when we're at work, we're not drinking and all of that sort of thing, and also have a buddy. you know, like, because I like to see the best in people, but weird stuff happens sometimes, especially when people are away from home and especially when they've been drinking and that sort of thing. And so like, I never wanted to have any of my gals get into a situation that was bad, that that was unfortunate. And so I think that kind of thinking about belonging, in that it's about taking care of each other, and it's about thinking about other people and really making sure that they fit and belong and feel comfortable where they are. So that's my bit on belonging. And that all kind of leads into this fear and toxicity in the workplace. And, I think it's pretty easy to identify an FBW, if you will, which is a fear-based workplace where fear is the predominant energy. And then an AHW, where I did totally name these, and I saw them somewhere and I thought that they were awesome. So I was like, yes. A healthy workplace is one where trust is the predominant energy. Basically, we have a contract that, you know what, you hired me, you pay me money, I'm an adult, so you trust me to do the work that I should be doing, and frankly, that you should be doing. And I think I in giving this presentation at Ignite on the Wednesday, so we had already been there, and there were 32 sessions for diversity in tech, and I was doing podcasts and meetups and running around, and I gave my session, and we had a lounge and all of that. And what was interesting was that my phone blew up, and people were seeking me out and wanting to talk to me about this particular session, because they either wanted to share a story with me or ask me questions about how they could, work on this inside of their workplaces, or situations that were happening with them. And also the burnout one. The burnout one was really big too. So I feel like at the end of the day, there's so much that we are dealing with in our lives. Just life is messy, and we have this sort of low level of stress anyway, of like, the fight or flight stuff of like, what's gonna happen, and to layer on top of it just the stress at work, or really, having a disconnect with somebody, it's really hard, and it really makes it tough to, again, want to be there and want to be productive and part of the team. Sometimes this fear, and I see it in many different ways. I think that, I see jealousy sometimes when you're trying to, climb the ladder and somebody's getting more attention than you, or, that they just know how to maneuver better, or maybe they know how to maneuver better, but they don't do very much work. They're really good at doing corporate judo, where they're like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Why don't you do that? It's kind of the Jedi mind trick, same thing, right? So I think being able to sort of identify this sort of stuff is not that hard. We can always see when somebody's being a jerk. The thing is that I think that thinking about going back to the why are they being a jerk? And I think it might be a little bit of psychology in there in thinking about that, but I think that, a lot of the times we're just like, that person's a jerk and I hate them and I don't want to work with them, and and you go home and you complain to your partner or your spouse, and one, that's a waste of energy and time, which you don't have enough of. Time, which is a construct, but time and good health are the things that we don't get back, right? And so wasting time and energy on somebody who is toxic and who is leading with fear is really exhausting, right? The thing is, though, that I think the time that you can spend on this and that person is trying to figure out the why they are doing what they're doing and who they are. And then, once I think you can make a choice on whether or not you want to go look for another team or another job or someplace else. But staying in a situation like that wastes your time, and then it also affects your health. Stress directly affects your health, and the more stress you have, the more burnout you have. You can't be your best, not only at work, but for your family, which is way more important anyway, and for the world at large, right? So looking at fear-based workplaces, I've seen everything. I mean, I've seen managers make people cry in meetings. and put them down and make them feel terrible about themselves. And then hear later that they go back and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry for that. I just, blah, 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 which that is the worst, and also, sometimes I had a woman in a session that we did a workshop, and she was like, I have this situation. And I was like, okay. And we started talking about it. And I was like, well, human resources are amazing and great people. And the thing is, though, about human resources is that human resources work for the corporation. So they are there to help you. They are there to guide you and to listen and all of that. But that also, she was like, well, the person that's doing this to me is the head of human resources. And I was like, ay caramba, I was like, oh, for goodness sakes. And so we talked through it, and it was 70 of us who stopped the workshop and focused on this gal. And, again, it was like, okay, well, here's a few different scenarios of like, do you have a relationship with somebody else on the C-levels? What is your connection and friends look like? Are they there? Can they support you? Do they see this? And then also, what? Always have your resume ready. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. And I always say to folks, have your LinkedIn ready, have your resume ready, and always be networking, so that if you are found in a fear-based workplace, that you have options. When we put all of our eggs into one basket, and a lot of times we have to, you know what I mean? It's not like you can be like, well, I'm going to have 14 different jobs and all this stuff, and, and I'm going to have my 3 kids, and I'm going to have my, blah, blah, all of that, it's easier said than done. But I do think that, we also get comfortable in places, and then not only do we get comfortable, but we also decide to just lump it. A friend of mine said, it's the 3 L's. You either love it, leave it, or lump it. And I like that in a lot of ways. And it definitely, I think, leaving yourself choices personally on if you are in this kind of a situation is super important. So it's sort of like the business of you and your career and your work should be run like you would run a project. It should be a swim lane for you always. And I think that's really, really important. The opposite of fear is joy, and the opposite of toxicity is good health. And I think that we need to bring more of that understanding in. And one of the things that I see a lot of the times, and I'm going to pop to this slide, and then I'm going to go back. A lot of the culprits in this, there's a lot that comes from other people, like a lot of, like, you're like, wait a minute, Heather, I'm not a jerk, and I, lead with positivity, and I work really hard, and I, am always trying to learn and all of that stuff. So, so yes, a lot of this comes from other people and their fear and their ego and all of that. The thing is that in being a warrior, and being able to combat this kind of thing, we do need to look at things that we do that make us that open us up for somebody who's leading with fear and toxicity to get into us, to get us, So it's about having the strength about yourself and making sure that some of these culprits that I've listed here, fear, which is us, our own fear about things. There's imposter syndrome, there's a lizard brain, there's doubt language, there's high emotions and tears and gossip, which are all not so good things. And I'm going to go back to, I did my computer updated this morning, and I was like, where's my presentation? And there was a version of it, but not this version. And so I quickly changed it. So that's why I'm a little out of order. Happens. It's good to be good on the fly. Anyway, so imposter syndrome, many of you have maybe seen this, and it's getting more play in the world, I think, right now. That's become more of a topic. And so you'll hear this terminology out there, and it's something about ourselves. And I think everybody has it in some way. Women tend to have it, I think, a little bit more than men. But it's also, it's sort of doubting yourself and doubting your accomplishments, and seeing if you would be a fraud because of it. And I'll tell you, because I was a theater major, I come from the arts. I don't have a business degree, and I got the chance to work at Microsoft, and I don't have a whole lot of fear about a lot of things. So it was one of those things where I was like, I'm gonna get this, and I did. And I had the beautiful chance to, I was always kind of a gadget head and loved technology, and I brought the first computer into the PC, yes, I'm that old, into the Universal Studios film booking agency in Dallas, Texas, where I made sure that movies got from Los Angeles out to the southeastern region. And so that's how I actually know a lot of Louisiana and Oklahoma and Texas and all of that stuff. I lived in Dallas for a bit. So I was talking, and this was a long time ago now, but a friend of mine said, and who was also a theater major, and she said, you just described yourself in a way that I don't think you realize. And I said, what did I say? And she said, well, you said, I'm working at Microsoft, and but my background, I'm just a theater major, and but I work in technology now. And that one word, just, in front of my awesome major that I loved and that I did really well at, and that taught me about empathy, which I use all the time, because if you can walk in somebody else's shoes, then you can relate to them, right? That's what theater is all about. If I can make you believe I'm, that character, and you relate to me, then you understand, and then you understand the world better. So in one word, I was putting myself down, and I was, in theater we say smoke and mirrors, right? So if you put some smoke and you put some mirrors, you'll lead them to see this thing right here, and you won't look over there, right? It's kind of like a magician's trick. So I think with imposter syndrome, that we don't necessarily believe that we are capable, or that somebody's going to find out we might not know as much as we appear to on the perception level. And that leads us to sometimes be the 4 items below there on the slide, that turns you into a perfectionist, which you run really hard, and you're trying to do, be amazing at everything all the time, right? And if I run so fast, I have a little bit of this, I'll tell you that. But if I run so fast and I do so many things and I'm awesome and I talk about it and all that stuff, maybe you won't see that. Maybe if you go a level deeper, that I don't know everything I know, right? Superwoman, Superman, same thing. I can save the day with everything. And sometimes it's that sort of natural genius type of person that is very, very sort of, say, intellectually smart, or very technology smart, or very street smart, but they have those things, or they have one of those things and they're lacking the other, right? And then what's the other one? Oh yeah, the rugged individualist. They're very they don't really relate to people. They're very, very much who they are, and stay in their lane. They're really not about connecting with people. And then somebody who is just sort of the expert of everything all the time. I think with this one, it's really about knowing yourself. And the other thing is that people don't always, and this may be a masculine energy, feminine energy thing, but a lot of the times, if I've seen this, I've heard it. So you're looking at a job, and you have a man look at it, and there's like 8 things on it, and there's like 3 things, and he's like, I don't really know that. Men tend to be like, I'll figure that out, whatever, or I will talk about that I know it, or I'm getting to know it. Women will look at that same job and see those 3 things, and they will just not apply for the job, because they're like, oh, that I don't know that. That's not who I am. And that's huge. So we cut ourselves off from actually going for the next rung or the next thing because we don't believe in ourselves. And we put those ideas in other people's heads, which leads me to the lizard brain. So Amy G. Dalla, or the amygdala, is that wee part of your brain that is responsible for fear and anger and negativity. And I think resistance is really a negative force. It's very hard to compete against this. I think that it makes us postpone projects. We'll be more self-critical, like obsessing over details of things, and finding excuse not to do something. So the lizard brain is our fight to flight mechanism. People talk about this a lot as well. So it's like we're not being chased by saber-toothed tigers. So instead of, just being and living in the world, we have this terrible little snot in our heads that is the negative Nelly, right? Or the negative Norman, I guess. And it basically starts dialogues that are like, wow, I've got this many people on the webinar. Are they paying attention? I'm looking to see if they're actually listening to me. Do they just have it on? Did somebody walk away? Are they making coffee? Does my hair look okay? I'm like, is my place kind of dirty? It's kind of all that stuff. Am I smart enough and all this enough to have the job I have and to do the things I do in the world? It really triggers all of that negative self-talk. And I've been working a lot. I work on all this stuff all the time. I don't know all the answers to everything, and it's something that you're always learning, right? But I also do study these things and look at them and do a lot of experiments, to be honest. And one of the things that I also noticed is that people, especially women, say I'm sorry all the time. Like, and it's interesting. Like, I've been working on my Spanish, and in Spanish, lo siento is I'm sorry. There's other ways to say it, but that's kind of the main one. And to say, excuse me, or like when you're trying to get by someone or something like that, it's permiso, right? Those words are really different, and we, especially in the United States, tend to glom the words I'm sorry, which to me mean you need to say that stuff when you're really sorry about something and you really mean it, and it means something. But we say I'm sorry for everything. When you bump into somebody, or when something happens, or like when you walk into a room, you apologize. Apologies are huge and wonderful when they're necessary and needed, but I think words are really important, right? And I think in that negative brain, apologizing for ourselves all the time, again, it's about perception. And when you have somebody who's, say, leading with fear and ego and toxicity, letting this voice in your head and apologizing for everything, and listening to I'm too this, I'm too tall, I'm too fat, I'm too short, I'm not smart enough, and everything that you would ever think, that one word that I think that everybody has one word or phrase in their life that probably happened to them when they were a kid, that somebody said to them, whether it was a parent or a teacher or a figure, a higher figure, that bugs them throughout their entire life. And if we don't deal with those things, it will bug you for your entire life. And that is the voice, the recording you have in your head that always goes back to your subconscious, that sits back here and brings that up whenever you get threatened by somebody who is full of fear and toxicity. So I think it's really important to understand that and think about those things when you're in a conversation with somebody and you're dealing with these fear-based work situations. Doubt language. So this is another thing, leaving yourself open for somebody to not really take you seriously. And I think that I've noticed it. I've written about this as well, and it's a shift, right? And when you start off, so I'll give you examples, right? Everybody, I really think that maybe the concept of doubt language is a really good one, that we could maybe take this on as a company. And I don't know, if you think it's a good idea, we could do that or not, or maybe, and I'm not sure, but it would be cool if you would consider it, right? I just glommed all of those things together in that way. But if you, and you have about 30 seconds or less to really explain and simplify your message, when you're talking about something, especially, it's an everyday conversation, but it's especially when you're presenting, or when you're presenting an idea, or in your one-on-ones with your manager, or when you're presenting something to your teams, right? And I think a lot of the times, it's about smiling too. But I think if I say to you, I believe that doubt language is one of the most important things that we can tackle as a company, and we need to support each other. And I feel that if we bring this into the conversation, we're going to make some great change. Totally different, right? I feel, I think, I believe. Those three things are awesome. And the that comes from also not knowing sometimes your stuff. And so it's also about doing your homework. Never leave yourself open for somebody to think that you are less than you are. Because those people that lead with fear and toxicity, they're there and they're ready and waiting for you, because their negative brain fires all the time, you know? I know that, I believe that the plan is, and I think words are really, really important, and it breeds confidence in your pitch, and you know what you're talking about to present it with certainty. I don't have a slide on this one, but if we go back to the things that I listed that were culprits, if you will: fear, imposter syndrome, lizard brain, doubt language. I also, high emotions, tears, and gossip. Those are not all the same things, obviously, but I think that sometimes we get so worked up. I was a little angry this morning, I'll tell you, about something that happened, and I quickly these days sort of bring it into a place to noodle. And I like to use the word noodle. I noodle on things, and noodling is, you know, like when musicians are trying to work out a melody or a rhythm, you know, you kind of noodle on your guitar. And I kind of noodle in my brain about things and about how I want to approach stuff. And I feel that, you know, it's so easy to get worked up and bring that sort of high emotion into the workplace. And especially too, if something's going on in your life. I mean, I was born in July. I'm a Cancer. I'm a little ruled by the moon, and I'm a little emotional. But I also lead with sort of I lead with positivity and joy all the time, because I have to, because it's what I want to be in the world. But I feel like it's hard when you bring that super high emotion into work. And so I feel like, be mindful of where you're at and what you're doing, because you bring that stuff into work, and it's hard. It makes it hard to get through a day. I know people can't take vacation and sick days all the time, but I feel like it's important to like look at those things and figure out where you are and not bring that stuff to the table if you can. And, you know, crying, you know, people cry, and I've dealt with it both with me. It's happened to me when I've teared up about something, and then I've dealt with people coming to me in tears. As a manager, I managed, you know, 50 people at Av Point, and from all over the globe, you know, and you always have to look at that with a lot of, you know, hopefully kindness and figuring that sort of thing out. But I feel like, you know, I always said to my gals, I was like, you know, if you can, no crying on the show floor. You know, if something happens, you know, let's take it, let's go and take it away and have a conversation about it. But it also, again, it leaves you open for someone to, a lot of people see tears and emotions as weakness. And I don't think that's the case, but there's a lot of people that will and do, and they'll judge you about it. So food for thought. And then gossip. Gossip is terrible, and I won't say reprehensible, but it is a very toxic thing. And I am very privileged and grateful that people, because of the work I do in this space, tend to tell me things, and they tell me their stories. And I think that's kind of who I am. I've had Lucy the doctor is in kind of for a long time in my life. And when somebody tells me something and a story or something about themselves, you know, I know that that story is not my story to share. And that there are things that need to stay in the, you know, the cone of silence or circle of trust or whatever you want to call it. But it's so easy to even trying to relate something or work something out or noodle and say to a friend, oh, well, you know, oh, this person, da, 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 da. Again, not your story to share. And so I feel like with gossiping, I've gotten so that I call people out on it. I basically, you know, they're like, oh, well, did you know? And I'm like, you know what? I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. And I will say things like, that is not your story to share. Is it? And I think not only is this about behaviors about ourselves, but it's about behaviors in other people. And I got to tell you, it sucks really. Like, I call it's not calling people out, but maybe it is, but it's education on sort of how we work together and stuff. And I feel like sometimes it's hard because somebody will come to me and be like, hey, this has happened, what do I do? Or can you deal with it or her or him? And I'm like, oh my goodness, you know. And I don't shy away from it. I'm very careful about those things. But also, I do think that if we're going to be involved in the sort of wonderful sort of continuing evolution of us as human beings in this world and how we relate to each other, it is on us to think about how we call out people and talk to them about their language and those things. And I know it's hard with managers, and I know it's difficult with that, and you have to be super careful, and you have to find your people and do that. But at the same time, you know, if we don't say things, then no change is made, right? So kind of getting back to this slide. How are we doing on time? Oh, we're good. Okay. Some other culprits, and this is the toxicity piece of it that I was talking about, and I've sort of woven those in a little bit, but you know, you've got queen bees, mean girls, that sort of thing, and that kind of goes back to the gossip and the jealousy. Most of the time, you know, I have so many dear, wonderful women, female friends, and you know, and trans friends as well. And it's that, you know, we sometimes can be our own worst enemy with the jealousy and the queen bee mentality and the mean girl mentality too. And that's so toxic. And it's difficult, especially if you've seen the movie Mean Girls, you know, people kind of run in packs sometimes. And it's hard to break through that and get to that. I found that a lot of the times where it's about trying to figure out how to make friends with people or avoiding them, to be honest. Both those tactics have worked well for me in the past. Mansplainers for a second. Basically, if I tell you something, I don't need you to tell it back to me because I understood it when I said it in the first place, right? And I know a lot of the times it's gotten a lot of buzz because it's a word, you know, it's a buzzword, you know, who he mansplained to me or whatever. And you know, I think I will give the benefit of the doubt that people are trying to be helpful. But I also know that some people aren't, and that again, ego and fear of you know, like that was a great idea and I'm going to steal it and say it and now make it mine. And I think you can do things in meetings and when you're on teams to like set up your alliances, you know, and make so that you have friends and colleagues that will say, oh, wait a minute, didn't Jennifer just say that? That's a great idea. You both should work on that. How cool is that? In the Obama administration, they did a lot of those tactics where they talked about how they would interact with each other and support each other during meetings. And I think that's really important and interesting to have a discussion like that with your colleagues and with the people who are in your unit, if you can. Bus drivers, people will throw you under the bus. That example of, you know, the people making someone cry in a meeting. With bus drivers, it's tough, you know, because somebody will say, well, I didn't get that email. Well, I didn't get you didn't tell me the due date. You didn't put a due date on there, blah, blah, blah. You know, here's the thing about bus drivers. There's an acronym that I learned very quickly in corporate culture. My manager who hired me at Microsoft, she said two things to me. She said, one, three actually. She said, one, if you can market a set of headphones, if you can market theater, if you can market tech, if you know how to do marketing, you should be able to market anything, and you just need to learn the lingo. And I truly believe that, because at the end of the day, we're all telling stories, right? And then second, she said, if you also remember that we relived 7th grade over and over again, and the same cliques and things that happened when we were back in middle school are alive and well in every situation we're in, then you'll do all right. And then she also introduced the acronym of CYA, and it is cover y'all, right? You can fill in the blank there. And so again, I know that you're like, what am I going to do with these fear and toxicity people, Heather? What are the answers? And you know what? The answers are a lot about you and how you protect yourself and how you put yourself in with other people that are like you, that you can have common ground with and have tactics to take care of that sort of thing. And with the CYA, especially in business, we don't often, most people hate doing spreadsheets, one. Most people hate writing about themselves. Most people don't understand how to toot your own horn. And so I think in the CYA category, it is about, again, never leaving yourself open to being able to be thrown under the bus. Sometimes you can't help it, and it happens all the time, and people will try, but always give a due date. Don't wait till the last minute to do stuff. Don't procrastinate, right? Make sure you're communicating. Talking about doing the work is just as important as doing the work. And that puts another layer of work on top of the work. But if you work in a silo, if you work in a vacuum, if people don't know what you're doing because you're hiding or you haven't done the work or whatever, you're not doing yourselves any favors. You're leaving yourself open to someone who's got that big ego, who's toxic, who's going to come for you. And so CYA, talking about the work that you're doing is almost as important, if not just as important, as the work you do. Outdated culture. That to me is, there are movies by a lot of people that you go back now and you watch, you're like, holy cats, wow, that's a lot. Or words that we say that maybe need to be taken out of the vernacular. And so I think there's sort of this outdated culture. Sometimes people point to Mad Men and other things. And I think there is a way to shift the culture in companies on how we treat each other. And again, it's about words, and it's also, a lot of companies are creating more codes of conduct. We did that at Ignite, where we updated all of that stuff, not only for the conference itself and sort of how people should be treating each other, but also specifically in the diversity and tech track, we talked a lot about, making sure that people understood that room where we were doing sessions was a safe space, and that, things that are shared there weren't going to get, popped up on Twitter, and that, again, sharing stories and keeping things in that space. It was really important to Shaunashi, who headed that up, and it was important to me as well, and all of us who were working on the event. And I feel like that those things are interesting, and it would be interesting for you to look at, does your company have a code of conduct like that? Like, everybody has sexual harassment policies across the board, but there's also, when you're going to an event, when you're going to a meeting, when you're traveling with somebody, all those sorts of things. I think that, sometimes that sort of thing may feel like it's overkill, but it's also, if the rules aren't written or the guidelines aren't put out there, then there's questions. It's kind of the same thing. If you don't tell somebody about your work, they don't know you're doing it, right? So a little bit more on tactics. I just made an acronym up of fear. So friends. I think that besides, I think one of the greatest things that you can do in your life is build amazing friendships. Falling in love is great, and getting married and having kids, like, those things are some of the pinnacles of what we can do, or finding a partner and all of that, or being really successful and happy being alone and single, whatever it is for you, those things. But I think, to me, building really strong friendships and building those things inside where you work is so important. I have a huge network, and I worked really hard at it on purpose. So I have that, and sometimes it's hard because I have a lot of people in my life who I want to talk to and who need me and all of that. So it's sometimes, I'll tell you, it gets a little exhausting. But at the same time, if something, your friends are there for when the great things happen, when you're like, yes, you know, and then they're there for you when you're like, when you're falling apart, you know, and something goes down. And I think that, do those things take time? Sure. But having a cup of coffee with somebody here in toxicity realm, and you can talk to them about it. So building your friendships inside of your workplace, I think, is super duper important. Ego, I talked a little bit about this earlier, but I think, you know, that is something that gets in our way. You know, I've started doing this thing where somebody says something to me, or something goes down, or I haven't thought about something, and I look at, I'm like, okay, this is how my ego is going to respond to this, which is usually like, and then I'm like, okay, what's the why? What's the why behind this? And then how do I respond to this with some compassion, knowing that all the things I've been talking about, right? But I've sort of been looking at this trifecta of response in myself of ego, the why, and compassion. And it takes 2 seconds, you know what I mean? I'm like, my ego's like, ah! And then, you know, my why is like, why the heck's that going on? Can I figure it out? And then my compassion is all right, that person's going through something or whatever, and how do I reframe or flip the script in order to, I don't know, a woman, a bank teller in Dallas, said to me one time, she's like, girl, today is fixing to be tomorrow. And I love that. And it kind of always is, so it's on point. But yeah, so figuring that sort of response, that ego response, but also put in the why response and the compassion response, I think is really important. Allies. You're like, aren't friends allies, Heather? And I'm like, yes, but I think there's friends, and to me that's that connective tissue that may go a little bit deeper. And then allies are people where, look around your organization and, you know, see who is awesome. You know, at the end of the day, see who's great. And maybe it's the manager. And sometimes this is also about leveling up, you know what I mean? So maybe you're not going to be best friends with your boss, and maybe you shouldn't, to be honest, or other people on your team. And allies gets into leadership and mentoring, and also, you know, building male allies, if we're talking, you know, gender, or, you know, across, you know, between male, female, trans, and all of that stuff. Look for your allies in those situations too, because I have so many amazing men in my life, and I have a lot of my mentors have been men, and I've worked really hard on having those relationships. And what's been cool is that, you know, they come to me asking me questions about all kinds of stuff, you know, like, what do you think I should do about this, and how should I handle that? And so it's that symbiotic learning that we're always doing. And so I think there's your friendships, and then there's your allies. Like when things go badly, I'm calling my friends, but I'm also calling my allies and or my mentors to get a read on a situation. And I think that's super important. And relationships. I think that there are all kinds of relationships, and friends, allies, relationships on the whole, I think is really just, it's such a huge way to deal with a lot of this fear and toxicity. It's also about what kind of relationship you want to have with yourself, to be honest. You know, a lot of the times I think that we have, you know, the best relationship that you need to have in your life, bar none, is the one with you. And God, that's hard, you know, and but it's true, you know. I think that, you know, our own reflection of ourselves is so important. And again, when you're living the best version of who you are, you know, sometimes that draws people to kind of trying to smush you down too. So there's that fear and toxicity breeds jealousy. You know, if you are trying to be a light in the world, you know, you'll have people who are like, I'm on that train with you, being the light with you. And then you'll have other people that are like, I want to squash that, right? And so, you've got, unfortunately, the yin and the yang and all of these things. But I think that the relationships that you have and, building friends, understanding this ego path and the different ways to look at something, creating allies and mentorships and looking at leadership to connect to you is really important. But I think at the end of the day, too, it's all about relationships. It's relationships with who we are and what we do and what we bring to the world. And then it's our relationships with all the other people. I've tried a bunch of different things. Got 10 more minutes. Okay. I'll tell you, I've lost a job, not been renewed, been fired or whatever, I guess officially, if you will, 3 times. And every time it's happened, I was handed a giant lemon and I made a vat of lemonade out of it. And every time it was such a good thing that it happened, though not in the moment. The first time I waited 2 weeks to talk to my parents about it because I was so distraught and upset and embarrassed and mad and everything else. And I think that, for me, I learned a lot from that sort of thing. And I think that what got me through that was, one, realizing that, this happens to everybody. And it's one of those things. Sometimes you're at the wrong place at the wrong time or with the wrong person or whatever. But what got me through were the relationships that I had built and how I decided to think about it and how I decided to think about myself. There's mentalities that take you into sort of victimhood or, this always happens to me. And again, words are so important. If you say something like, this always happens to me, I'm always, this is never going to be good. Again, lizard brain, negative self-talk, putting negative energy into the universe, self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I'm never going to have a great relationship with my boss because they're terrible. Well, you're not, because you're setting yourself up for that, right? So I feel like in thinking about dealing with situations where things go badly, this fear acronym I made up, maybe that helps in some thinking about it. I don't know. I'll take you into some resources, and then I'm going to finish up and I guess take questions. I don't know if we're doing Q&A or not, but I love Brene Brown. Her book, Daring Greatly, completely changed my life. It was one of the moments in my life that I can mark of like when I read that book, something changed in me. She's got another one, Braving the Wilderness, and then a new one that just came out. Brene Brown is the foremost researcher on shame in our country in the U.S., and she lives in Texas, and she's a speaker and lecturer. And she's kind of sassy pants, and she drops a few F-bombs here and there, so sort of my kind of gal, I guess. But she really has, I think, awakened a lot of people about being wholehearted and about being brave, and about looking at shame, which is a very big thing in our society. I think there's a lot of shame and guilt around things, especially around loss and when things don't go our way. So I would highly recommend checking her out. She's great to listen to on audiobooks. There's an Awaken blog on Medium that's really great, that's about diversity and inclusion. And I really like the female quotient as well. They're doing some really good things in our area around all of these topics. So, and then there I am again. So if you want to get a hold of me, I am at heather.newman@contentpanda.com. There's a Panda blog that's more on the tech side. There's a marketing blog that's up on medium.com. I'm at Hedda, Hedda Newman, on the Twitterverse and Insta. Hedda is a nickname, and it came from a Czechoslovakian theater director of mine who was directing me in a show, and that's how he pronounced my name. It was like, Hedda, I would like you to look at it like it's a milky glass. And then everybody started calling me that. So, little point of fact. What up?
I would have thought that was from Hedda Gobbler, but that makes sense too.
That's a really depressing play.
That is a very depressing play, yes.
There's another woman, Hedda Hopper, from back in the Charlie Chaplin days, and she wasn't a nice woman either. So I was like, I don't know if I'm getting into the right course here, but yeah, it's all right. I'm making it better, maybe.
There you go. Oh.
Anyway, that's my presentation. I rambled on. Hopefully put some nuggets in there for everybody. So yeah.
This has been such a great session, Heather. Thank you very much. This is I definitely sat here listening to this going, oh yeah, I've dealt with that. oh man, I've dealt with that. I mean, I've seen those things happen. So this is such a good session that I feel like people are watching this and going, oh, I've seen that. Oh, that gives me a name or a word for that, or that gives me something. So just thank you. That was a lot of really good stuff. We got about 5 minutes left, guys. So if you have any questions, throw them Heather's way. She loves questions. She'll love answering them for you. I'm still just in shock at how great this session was. Not that I'm surprised. I just love when we have good content and great speakers and stuff on here. We got a couple shout outs for you, Heather. This was super helpful. Thanks, Heather, from our friend Paisley Gray. Thank you, Paisley. And then from our friend Sydney Thornton. Never disappoints. You can say that with a Swedish accent if you wish. Wow. Guys, we have some of the greatest people who attend our webinars. You guys just make my heart so happy, and you spend your days with us once a month, and it just makes me so happy. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's super cool. I love it that you all do this. It's super great. I see.
Yeah, it's been a lot of, you can probably see the comments as well, yeah. We've had a pretty great wide selection of topics, and this is definitely one we've been wanting to get in for a while. Okay, from our friend Greg Frick. Do you think more talk is needed about what it may feel like to experience diversity? I guess I have an opinion on this. My opinion is that you may experience diversity as discomfort, and without reflection and awareness, people could just think there is not a fit.
Yes. Hey, hello. First of all, Greg. Yeah, I do think that, because there is an uncomfortableness to diversity, to looking at history, to looking at things that, maybe we're not so proud of, if you will, right? It's uncomfortable. And it's also sometimes when diversity is sort of, it's like, rah, it's like, you need to do this right now. And you're like, I'm trying, and I'm trying to be this way. And I do think that, I think with the Me Too movement and some of the things that have been happening in our world, like I talk to a lot of men, they're like, I don't even know what to do anymore. They're like, I can't call somebody, I can't do anything. I'm like, I'm trying to date. I don't know what, like there's a lot of emotion and a lot of stress about that. And I think that, it's about, we got to talk to each other. We've got to ask the questions. We've got to relate to each other on a level that is, I think, a little bit deeper than maybe that we have been, so it's, I've seen people sort of lash out to somebody, oh, don't even say that. And it's like, oh man, and it's like, we're all learning, we all say stuff sometimes that we're like, whoop, you know what I mean? So I think, is there awareness right now that we need to maybe heighten a little bit? Yes. And that's a good thing, I think, in the world. But I do think that, this isn't easy stuff, it's not easy hearing people's stories about terrible things that happened to them, and how to deal with it. I was like, oh my goodness, so I do think that additional dialogue is needed, and it's all about communication and talking and asking the questions and offering up. I want to be more diverse. I want to be an ally. I want to be a part of this conversation also, right? So there's the proactive and then the reactive as well, right? So it's like when something happens, dealing with it, but also being like, hey, and there's ways to do that. There's ways to, write about that in blogs and talk about having, not confusion, but just not knowing what to do, but trying. Like, that's huge, right? So, yeah. That's what I think.
There you go. Great answer. I love that answer. Yeah, there's I'm gonna mess up the actual name of this premise, but there's a premise called like I forget what it's called, but basically it's treat people how you would treat Dwayne The Rock Johnson, and it's called like The Rock something. Yeah. So that was mentioned before, but it both makes me laugh because like I grew up watching wrestling, so like I think about him in that respect. Like now I think about him now, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I get that, but it's just a funny premise to me. That like but you should just in general like be treating people with like you know this and be talking to people and having an open line of communication. Like I completely agree with everything you said. It's the short version because I will now ramble on for 20 minutes about that.
I had a fella say to me that another guy was asking him, he's like, well, what can we say to women? Like, how can, like, I'm trying to flirt with somebody or trying to do this. And he was being super flippant, but he did say, he was like, well, man, he was like, don't talk to women. You need to talk to women how you don't want to be talked to in a prison bathroom. How about that? And I was like, whoa.
Wow.
And I was like, that's a lot.
That is a lot. Wow.
And I was like, holy cow. Everything you think you don't want to hear there. And I was like, wow, you know.
Yeah,
So
you know.
there's a lot of high passion, emotion, and even, you know, people trying to like figure out how to go and have those conversations, you know.
Yeah.
Some are extreme, you know, where pendulums go like this and sit here, and sometimes they're here, and we all like them a little bit more when they're here, you know. So hoping that pendulums swing to where we're more together than apart.
Definitely. Couldn't agree more. Well, we are at our time, everyone. Thank you so much, Heather, again, for being here today. This has been an amazing session. Thank you for sharing this with us and sharing some personal stories and all that with us. Thank you for that. Everyone, this is our last session of the year for the Pixelmo webinar, so we're going to take December off, and we'll be back in January with some really amazing stuff. I can't wait to share that with you all, so keep an eye on your emails, and we'll be announcing the next couple. We're hoping to have Heather back. I haven't asked her about it yet, but we'd love to have you back at some point.
I love doing these, and yeah, I'll bring you a new topic.
Excellent. We love hearing that.
Yeah,
so again,
final episode.
Woohoo! we'll have Heather's Corner. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I will have the recap and recording of this up in the next couple of days, definitely before Thanksgiving next week. We'll have that up and out to you guys. Speaking of which, have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Enjoy that time with family and friends. Enjoy the food. This is my favorite food holiday, so I'm really excited for almost said Halloween, for Thanksgiving.
That's all I have to say.
Yeah. Woohoo! There you go. So have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and we will catch you all again around the bend. See you next time.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.